Hello, everybody, and welcome to my playthrough of Godfather Esports. This game is a sort of team fight tactics clone, if you're familiar with that game, but it's pretty interesting. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. I've been playing through it, and yeah, I hope you enjoy this series, and let's get right into it. Starting off, we're going to be picking our assistant and our coach. Our assistant is basically just somebody who brings us information during the season. Our coach is obviously us. Then we're going to go ahead and pick through our team. Here you can see that I'm just answering some questions. I don't know if this has any impact on gameplay at all. However, it is some intriguing questions that ask you kind of what your team should be about. As I go through this, the next option is going to be to select my team, and I'm going to use this time to kind of explain what all of the stats are that the characters use. So there's 5 main stats: offense, defense, farming, reflex, and mechanics. Offense affects your fight hit, field hit, and offensive scaling. I'll go over what all of that means in just a moment. Defense is a high effect on your farming efficiency and defensive scaling, while it also affects your fight evade and field evade. Your farming stat highly affects your farming efficiency, with a really slight impact on your fight evade, field evade, offensive and defensive scaling. Your reflex stat affects your fight evade and field evade, with a slight impact on everything except for your farming efficiency. Mechanics is similar, with it affecting your fight hit and your field hit, with a slight impact on everything except for farming efficiency. So what does all of that mean? So your fight hit is your chance to hit the opponent during the fight. Your fight evade obviously is your chance of not being hit during the fight. So a higher fight hit and a higher fight evade means that you're less likely to get hit and more likely to hit the opponent. Your defensive scaling provides you with more max HP when you gain gold. So for every 100 gold, you should normally gain 1 HP if I'm not mistaken. Then if you have, say, 150% efficiency, every 300 gold, you'll actually gain 4 HP. Your farming efficiency is the gold gained by natural growth, so over time you obviously just gain gold in the game. Then just doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, such as going down your lane, killing the monsters in jungle, anything that basically earns you gold. Your farming efficiency makes it so you gain a little bit more. Then your offensive scaling is just your attack power that's provided by gold. So when you gain gold, again, you gain attack power, much like HP. The higher your offensive scaling, the more attack power that you gain. So the characters all have these unique traits. The percentages go up as their stats go higher, etc., etc. It all kind of balances itself out in the end. Each player is restricted to a hero pool. In the beginning, there's usually 5 or 6 heroes that they're allowed to play. During the pick ban system, these heroes can get banned or taken out of the game, and much like any other MOBA, that means that they're going to have to play something else. This also means that if you put all of your eggs into one basket with a character, that they could get stuck in a very tough position because they're going to have to play a character that they're not super familiar with. Now, what happens is as a character plays a hero more often, they end up getting a better mastery of the hero, which means they get increased stats. They'll have additional cards in the pool or reductions to cost of cards, for example, as well as like removing some of the downsides or improving the downside of a character that they might have. For example, sometimes cards will have stacks on them. There's a good example where a character will have a stack in their cards for every turn the card is not in the hand, but when the card leaves your hand, it loses all of its stacks. One of the upgrades that you can get with that character is that instead of losing all the stacks when it leaves the hand, it keeps the stacks and then continues gaining them once it leaves the hand. It's all a little bit fleshed out and complicated, but it starts to make sense as you play the game more. Getting into that, as you play the game more, your characters will earn skills. These skills are pretty minor overall, but they add up just like anything else in any other game. They can give you buffs such as farming efficiency, attack power buffs as you level up. You can get crit rate or crit damage increases and stat buffs as you level up. Really minor improvements, but you never know when that extra 1 or 2 attack power that they gain from those skills will end up kind of winning you the game. Getting on with things that the characters earn, there are traits, which you can see kind of in the bottom left, those 5 hexagons. Those are the character's traits. Each character has a trait depending on what they have when you draft them. As far as I know, there's no way to change their traits, so it is something that you need to consider when you put a player on your team. You do need to think about whether or not their trait is going to be good for you. There are passive traits like Duckweed's our top laner, who has a a larger chance to critically succeed during training, which I'll go over probably in another video, the training aspect of everything. Then there's others that are more active, such as our bottom laner in this game, which allows me to draw 3 cards and then gain 3 development points in between each of the dragon fights. Which brings me to what the phases are in the game. So essentially the game is split into 4 phases. There is the rounds, which are the AI controlled sense of the game. It's what you're seeing right here. The characters move on their own, they push their lanes, the junglers go around jungle and clear out the monsters and gain their gold, just like any other MOBA. And in between the rounds, there is what we call deployment phase. So each turn or each round that ends, you end up gaining what is called a deployment point, or essentially a mana of sorts. With the mana, you are able to use your cards. Once you hit 8 deployment points, you are able to start playing cards out of your hand. You'll draw a card every turn as well, or every round. Then you'll use your deployment points to play your cards, and each card kind of has a different effect. Some of them deal damage, some of them increase your farming efficiency, some of them increase your offensive scaling, your defensive scaling, some of them draw you more cards. There's a lot of different cards in the game. Some of them are character specific, and then some of them are more tied to your character themselves or your player themselves. So the players each bring 3 cards of their own into the game, and then some heroes have between 3 and 6 cards that are in their card pool. The heroes or champions that they play as have some unique gimmicks to them, and once I'm done kind of explaining the game, I'm going to go over one of the characters that our jungler is going to end up playing pretty much throughout the playthrough, and what I consider to be one of the better, if not one of the best early game characters that is available to you. That being said, I want to talk about the combat phases. So once you're done with the deployment phase, or during your deployment phase, there's what's called a combat phase, which is what you're seeing right now. Essentially, the heroes will go into combat with each other. There will be a number of rounds typically that they are going to fight towards, or there is a win condition of the fight that they will reach. Until round 20, once round 20 hits, every character will take 2,000 damage. That was a addition that they just made very recently, which made a lot of sense because there was a very efficient way of basically stalling out the game where you could just continuously heal and keep yourself alive, and that's not very fun, obviously. Now, with the combat phase, all of the heroes will have their own kind of combat abilities, and these will all influence the combat in different ways. Some characters are more tank heavy, which means they're there to take damage. Some characters are very DPS heavy, they're there to deal the damage. Some characters are healers or shielders. There's a lot of different unique ways that each hero kind of adds to combat, as well as adds to the round-based mechanic of the game. So I want to try to explain that the best that I can, but unfortunately, without knowing what each hero does, there's not really any way to do that. That being said, I do want to kind of finish off this with the last, it's not necessarily a separate part of the game, but rather a addition to the combat phase, and that is the Dragon and Herald fights. So each season, the amount of rounds between Dragon and Herald fights will change, but in the first season, which is what we're playing right here, there are 10 rounds respectively between the Dragon and Herald fights. Now, the Dragon and Herald fights essentially just give you some buff cards, typically a gold increase card, which is a little bit more important in the later seasons, but does affect your attack power and your HP pool, which again, if you win Herald, you get a small buff to your HP, you get a small buff to your attack, and that could end up leading you to winning the game, especially if you're very close in stats to the opponent. So the typical format of the early game Dragon fights are your your bottom laner, your jungler, and your support will go into the combat. Then for the first Herald fight, it is your top laner, your jungler, and your mid laner. Then all the preceding fights will be a 5-on-5 combat. All 5 characters will go into combat together, and then it is the first to, in the 3v3 modes, it's the first to kill 1 opponent. In the 5v5, it's the first to kill 3. The Dragons and Heralds don't really add anything to the fight. They kind of just stand on the sidelines and watch the fight, basically. But if you do fight under a tower, whether it be your tower or the opponent's tower, the tower will participate in the fight. And that means that if you're fighting under the mid laner's tower, then you're taking 400 damage a turn, which especially in the early game can really cost you a lot of your HP pool and end up to you losing the fight. If you get under the back lane towers or near the Nexus, I should say, the towers deal a lot of damage. I've seen them up to 800 damage a turn, and I've made the mistake of going into those combats a couple of times when I'm still kind of low level, and my team gets wiped out very quickly because they deal a lot of damage. So you need to be conscious about where you're starting your fighting, which is a kind of good segue to talk about like what cards actually do. So there are a few key mechanics of each card. It's going to be kind of tough to go over all of them, and it's something that'll be a little bit easier as we go into the champion overview. But there's essentially a few keywords that are important to know. The initiate keyword, which starts combat for all characters within the hex range that the card states. So it can be 1 hex, 2 hexes, or 3 hexes. There's always an outline that shows you who's going to be in the combat. Then there's the keyword of attack, which is a field hit sort of card play. When you play the card, the character will attack out in the field. It does not start any combat phase. It just attacks the character, deals the amount of damage that's stated on the card, usually in a percentile. It doesn't actually tell you how much damage it will deal. Then the deployment phase will continue. Finally, there is a sort of push mechanic. It's not necessarily a keyword, but there are some cards that will push the lane, which essentially pushes the opposing team back the amount of hexes that's stated. And if you push into a tower, you will typically damage the tower rather than pushing through the tower to like the next hex. Those are some of the keywords that I want to make sure that I explain, because those are pretty prevalent in the game, and if you don't understand what's going on, those keywords can kind of help you make an understanding of what's happening around you. But I want to kind of get into some champion explanation or champion overview so that you understand what the champions do and why we play them and why we pick them. And I'm going to start with the champion that I play the most on my jungler, and that is Zhangxi Zhe. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Zhangxi Zhe is one of, if not the best early game character that I think is in the game currently. Looking at Zhangxi, she is a assassin physical melee hero type. The assassin type is typically focused on dealing a lot of damage. Physical damage is just the type of damage, and then melee, obviously, again, the type of damage that Zhangxi deals. So Zhangxi has a neat mechanic where she gains stacks of what's called the Reaper, and the Reaper is essentially a stack that allows her to prioritize attacking the enemy unit with the lowest health. This essentially means that if you put a character down to 1 HP and Zhangxi has a stack of the Reaper, it is a guaranteed kill. Now, that in and of itself is pretty strong because she's always going to attack the lowest health character, which means you can end combats a lot sooner because she doesn't attack randomly like the other characters do. But even more importantly than that, when Zhangxi kills an enemy unit, she attacks again. And not only that, she deals an extra 125% damage instead of the base 100%. So basically an extra 0.25% damage for each attack that she does. So if she always attacks the lowest HP character, and when she kills the lowest HP character, she gets to attack again. The attack is random at this point. There have been multiple times in my playthrough already, and I'm not that far in, where Zhangxi just goes in and kills three characters on like the 3rd round from getting a random crit, and then a random crit, and then a random crit. And then all of a sudden it's a 2v5, and my team is pretty much winning the dragon fight regardless of what happens. Zhangxi gets her stats through her character-specific cards, specifically the card Old Time. It's a non-playable card, which means it cannot leave your hand unless you discard it. When it enters the discard pile, I should say, it gains a stack of the Reaper, the ability that allows her to attack the lowest HP enemy. If she does not have any stacks of the Reaper, she will not attack the lowest HP enemy. She will attack randomly, just like every other character. Then her card Blitz, which basically you are going to initiate. You choose a hex within 2 hexes of any direction. So if she is on the middle hex, then you can go as far as next to the back mid laner's tower, and any heroes that are within 1 hex of her, both friendly and the opponents, they will start combat with Zhangxi and whatever characters you have with her. This will typically lead to you getting into a 2v2 with the opponent's mid laner and the jungler, but sometimes you will use it to get into combat with the bottom laner and the support. and you'll use it to time in a 3v2 so that you can deal a lot of damage. Then she has the card Instant Slash. Same thing, you choose a hex within 2 hexes of any direction. Zhangxi moves to the target location and attacks all enemy heroes. And again, this doesn't start combat, but she also attacks monsters. So you can use this again if you're sitting on the mid lane and their jungler is trying to wipe out their jungle on their side. You can use this to push over to their jungle and wipe out their monsters, because your heroes will only attack in the hexes that are your color. You earn more hexes of your color by winning your dragon and your herald fights, but you can use this card to go in and steal your opponent's jungles, and that can lead to you getting a huge advantage on them, as well as it wipes out all of the jungle monsters within 1 hex of her. So instead of waiting 3 or 4 rounds to get 3 or 4 monster kills, she instead just wipes out the entire jungle that's around her, which can be really strong. Now, these don't necessarily work in tandem with Old Time, but the cost of playing these cards is that you have to discard a card, which means that Old Time is the perfect discard target when you have these cards in hand, because now you're getting your stack of the Reaper, and that makes this hero incredibly strong. She already has really decent base stats, or at least the jungler that I've been putting her on has really decent stats, which makes her one of, again, if not the best early game hero, especially because everybody's stats are so low that when you are getting into combats with Zhangxi, she is almost always going to kill somebody, especially if you're putting the support into the fight on the opposing team. She wipes out support players, because a lot of support players will either be playing a healing character or a shielding character or a buffing character, and those characters are great, but they don't have a huge HP pool, which means that after 2 or 3 hits, Zhangxi just wipes them off. And when your healer is gone and your team is kind of based on slowing the game down, there's not really much more that you can do to keep your team going, especially because the healers and the shielders in this game really aren't as strong when they're not on the field, obviously. One other thing that should be of note is that Zhangxi can only be played in the jungle or the mid lane, so you won't see Zhangxi like as a support character, kind of like rounding out the way your team comp works. She will always either be in the jungle or in the mid lane. That does keep the balance of the game going a little bit more, because if you could just stack 5 assassins on your team, it would probably be pretty broken. But overall, I really think Zhangxi is one of, if not the best early game character in the game. As the game kind of progresses, there's some more characters that will unlock that outshadow her just a little bit, but if you have the right team comp, she really does bring a lot of DPS and a lot of damage dealing to those low health characters that really brings a team comp that just deals a lot of damage together, because she will be taking out those weaker characters that cannot stay in the fight for very long. That being said, my jungler is going to be playing her for a majority of this playthrough. One thing about this game is that the bots aren't, or the AI isn't really great at the pick ban system. They kind of just pick and ban random stuff, it feels like, rather than picking based on like what your team comp is or what you typically play, which is something that I'd like to see them update in the future. But that's another video that I'm planning on making, talking about some things that I'd like to see them change. That being said, the developers have been updating this game pretty much daily since it came out a few weeks ago, which kind of gives some good signs and brings some good life into the game. There's not been any real buffs or nerfs to the characters or anything, but they've just been kind of fixing the game as it goes along, and I'm hoping that in the near future there are going to be some buffs or changes to the games that I would like to see. That being said, we're coming up on the end of the game here. We're going to be able to take down the opponent and get our first match win of the season. This is kind of the tutorial section, so I'm gonna kind of breeze over the first few games and not really do too much commentary on what's happening in the game, but later I might just allow the live commentary to play, as I did stream these on my Twitch page. You can go check that out. Link is in the description if you want to hop into chat and say what's up. I also stream on YouTube, so if this is an easier platform for you to view that on, then that is perfectly fine with me. That being said, if you did enjoy the video, I would appreciate you leaving a like and subscribing. If you have any questions about the game or anything you want me to go over, please feel free to let me know. I'm really enjoying this game. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of tactics that you have to kind of pay attention to, but I will admit the balancing of the game does need some work, but it's only been out for a couple of weeks, so I'm hoping that that's something that they change in the near future. That being said, thank you so much for watching the video. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.